Coaching is about helping a player perform to the very best of their ability. Before we dive into the mechanics of coaching, I'd like to just take a few steps back and look at performance more holistically. The reason we need to do this is there's a number of elements to performance that aren't directly impacted by coaching. These elements need other approaches or other interventions with the player. So here's the simple formula I'd like to offer. A player's ability plus their willingness to play to the best of their ability, plus the empowerment given to the player, minus any interference that are putting obstacles in the player's way, will result in their eventual performance. What we're going to do now is just dive into each one of these elements and see where coaching fits in and what other approaches would be appropriate as well. Ability is a combination of a player's aptitude, their knowledge of how to play the game well, and their ability to translate that knowledge into actual play on the field. So if we go back to aptitude, we know that aptitude can't be changed by a coach or through training. A player is born with the aptitude that they have. Another word for it would be talent or potential, and that doesn't really change. So as a coach, if you find that you've got a player on your team that doesn't have the aptitude to play the game that you're playing well, then your only choice really is to help them to find a game that they are going to excel at, where they do have the correct aptitude. So this is about hiring right. And if you don't hire right, you need to move on as quickly as possible to avoid damaging your team as well as the player, who's really not going to respond very well to coaching or training because they just don't have the capacity to learn the game that you're trying to teach. So once we've got a player who's got the correct aptitude, the next thing we're looking at is teaching them how to play the game, giving them the actual skills of the game. And here there's a number of training modalities that are going to be effective, from classroom training to computer-based training or e-learning, self-study. There's a number of different ways the player can learn how to play the game effectively. Once the player has got an idea of how to do things, now we get to the really big task, because the theory is often very simple. The practice of the theory is often where the trouble lies, and this is where coaching addresses the player's performance. So here what we're looking at is helping the player through a coaching process to translate the theory of what they know into practice. And this is an iterative process of working on one skill at a time and helping the player to master each skill and particularly to groove it into their subconscious so that they can use that skill effortlessly while they're playing the game, rather than thinking too much about what they're trying to do. So hopefully you can see where coaching fits in to developing ability. Willingness is about the player trying hard, giving their best. And there's 4 conditions that need to be in place for a player to try hard. The first one comes from the previous section around the player having the correct aptitude and knowing what to do. If a player doesn't have aptitude or doesn't know what to do and they're trying hard and still failing, they're going to very quickly get discouraged. The second thing that needs to be in place is incentivization. The player needs to be incentivized to play the game well and disincentivized from playing badly. But most importantly in an incentive, they need to be incentivized to try hard and disincentivized from not trying hard. This is a management function. It's around a manager putting the correct remuneration and incentive plan together that rewards the right behaviors, and also very importantly about introducing consequence when the player doesn't try hard. The next thing that's important is vision, which is a function of leadership. It's around creating a vision that the player can buy into, that they're creating value for others, and that the world is, even in a small way, somehow better for the job that they do. If you're doing a good job of setting vision for your player, or a compelling vision that they can buy into, that will allow them to commit a part of themselves that remuneration can't buy. And then the last piece is around affirmation. It's around noticing the things that your players do well and congratulating them on that or affirming them on that. What affirmation does is it builds a solid platform or foundation that the player can build their self-confidence and their self-concept on. The opposite of affirmation is criticism. And all criticism does is it allows the player to dwell in the ruined house of the past, where all they can see is what they haven't done properly. So affirmation helps create the sense for the player that they're in the process of building, of adding one brick at a time, of good performance, of new skill. So if you put these four things together, you're going to get a player that's going to try hard. And very importantly, they're prepared to walk that long, hard road to excellence. Empowerment is the next element in the performance formula. It's really about helping the player to just focus on playing the game and not having to worry about anything else. There's four things that need to be in place for a player to be empowered. The first one is that they need to be equipped. They need to have all the things that they require in order to play the game properly. So in sports, a football player running onto the field without football boots is going to be a bit of a problem, and despite the fact that they're highly talented and motivated, they're still not going to play very well without the correct equipment. So in a contact center, it's exactly the same thing. A player needs to have the right equipment, and that equipment needs to work properly. The next thing is that the player needs to be directed. They need to know what they're able to do and what they're not able to do, or what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. They shouldn't be in a situation where they're trying to play the game and they're not quite sure whether they're allowed to do something or not. The boundaries of what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do need to be very, very clear for them. The next thing that they need to be empowered is they need to be supported by good process and systems. So when the player is trying to execute something for a customer, they need to be able to trust that the systems and processes that you've put in place for them actually work and they're going to deliver the result the customer requires. Again, without that, the player is going to be very substantially distracted from what they're doing by worrying about what's going to happen when they push the button. The last thing the player needs to be empowered is autonomy. They need to have a space where they can, a very clear space where they can make their own decisions and create their own solutions. A real trick in customer experience work is to make the space as large as possible. The more things you can give your player autonomy around, the more magical solutions they're going to create for your customers, and the more engaged your players are going to be in the process, because now their creativity has a place it can play. There's a real piece around designing your business correctly to make space for this kind of autonomy. It means that your processes, your procedures, and your systems need to support autonomy and not rail against them. So you put these four things together and you've got a player that's empowered. The last element of the performance formula takes away from the first three. Interference is stuff that's going on inside the player's head that's interfering with them being able to focus on the game. There's two basic sources that interference can come from. The one is psychological and the other is from home. With psychological interference, I'd offer that it's not really the realm of the manager as coach. You're not qualified to be going into this place, and what you want to be doing is referring your player into a process that can be more helpful to them. The next one is home. There may be things going on at home, such as a death in the family, a sick child, marital difficulties. All of these things are going to take the player's mind away from playing the game and focus it at home where they've got the problem. There's again not a lot you can do as a manager, as coach, other than provide them some support and a little bit of space. But you don't really want to be going into this area with your player, again because you're not qualified, and secondly because you don't want to be creating a kind of dependence where your player starts using the things that are going on at home as an excuse for them not performing at work. So rather what you want to do, rather than dealing with it yourself, is just put them into the right channel where they can get the help that they need, sort the issue that they've got out, and return their mind back to work where they can focus on playing the game to the best of their ability. So that is the performance formula. And interference is something, again, that you as a coach are not going to spend a lot of your time focusing on. That's the performance equation. In the Game On system, we've divided the functionality into two basic areas. The one being coaching. You're dealing with particularly the ability of the player. And the other one being an issue management system where you're dealing with all the other stuff that's primarily management related, where you're moving obstacles to performance out of the way using management processes. So I'd invite you to check out those two streams. There's a number of videos on the coaching session, and there's one video on how to use the issue management system. I invite you to have a look at those when you've got some time. Catch you there.